Okay, I believe this is where we left off in class day, discussing an increase in education for women in this Protestant movement, really because of the emphasis on reading the Bible. So we'll pick up from here. And the recently invented printing press by Johann Gutenberg helped the Reformation spread. As the Reformation continued to spread, it splintered into an array of competing Protestant churches. Religious differences made Europe's rather fragile political system even more volatile. For example, the French Wars of Religion, the Catholics versus the Huguenots from 1562 to 1598, and the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. These, specifically the French Wars of Religion, this was an intense popular religious dispute, and it led to cases of unpopular unrest, mob violence in France and Germany. And there were many political actors that found common cause with Luther's theological revolt against Rome, like kings and other nobility members. And as religious, political, and economic tensions became intertwined, the peasant revolts broke out in Germany, and that's the 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648. And this pitted the Roman Catholic Church and the Holy Roman Empire against the Protestant kings and princes throughout Europe because they sought independence from Rome and the emperor. And while the Peace of Westphalia brought an end to the fighting, it actually established the modern state system in Europe, and it recognized the end of Catholic religious unity on the continent of Europe. And this provoked a counter-reformation by the Catholic Church. The Council of Trent was convened in 1545 to 1563, and it clarified Catholic doctrines and practices. And this was the Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church was faced with widespread revolt, and so they called the Council of Trent. And not only was it set to clarify doctrines and practices, it also wanted to reaffirm its authority over doctrine and ritual. Now, there was an effort to end corruption and abusive practices by clergy members, but the church took a hard line against heresy and dissent, approving militant orders such as the Society of Jesus, what became known as the Jesuits. But they also did give attention to individual spirituality, and piety. And there was a new commitment to the renewal of the Catholic Church and even expanding Catholic ideas. Now, the Reformation encouraged skepticism toward authority and tradition that the Catholic Church continued to hang on to. But it also fostered religious individualism. And in the following centuries, the Protestant habit of independent thinking led to skepticism about all revealed religion. And this image, I love this image. It's a great painting. Let's sit here and break this down. The figures in this painting, what are they doing? Well, here on the left are 6 men, look to be in rather plain clothing, modest black robes. Looks like they're carrying books, but they're holding a giant quill. And they seem to be positioning on the door of a fairly modern-looking building. But on the right, we see 5 men. 2 are in more elaborate clothing. And they stand below a figure in bed, probably with some type of illness. And the columns and arches of the building on the right suggest an antiquated legacy, right? Newer building, older building. And the scene within the structure seems to suggest the various abuses and ailing nature of the Roman Catholic Church. So who do you think the men on the left are, and why are they carrying a giant quill? Well, the giant quill is supposed to represent the large support for Martin Luther in his 95 Theses that he posted on a church door in Wittenberg, Germany in 1517. And why do you think the artist put a white swan at the center of the painting, in between the modern and the antiquated scenes? Well, this might be the artist's effort to illustrate the origin of the giant quill and the broad support for religious reform. And it also implies that the call for Reformation has its roots in the grace of something created by God, which is a rather interesting thought. But look what's happening in the background. The sky in the background of the painting appears to be showing a light from heaven. Right? That can imply that the painter believed that the Reformation sparked by Luther was not only approved by God, but supported by God. Right? Notice the fire and maybe the possible fighting over these new ideas. But it's a very interesting painting. And this map gives you a really good idea of the religious disarray that Europe was in. See, the purple areas are Catholic, and you can see the Protestant influence in this lighter color and the darker orange. And of course, the Eastern Orthodox Christians over here in the east. And the boundary in red of the Holy Roman Empire. So you can see here in what is now present Germany, the difference between, the different religions, say, here, and then, mostly Catholic Spain or mostly Protestant England. There's a lot of differing views on religion. And, of course, Wittenberg, here's where Martin Luther placed his 95 Theses in the church there in Wittenberg. And, this is not exactly present-day Germany, because there's, parts of Austria right here, and Hungary is over here. But, heavy Catholic influence, as well as a Protestant domination that began to take over here in the East because of Martin Luther's ideas. All right, so let's look at Christianity outward bound. Christianity motivated and benefited from European expansion. The Spaniards and the Portuguese saw overseas expansion as a continuation of that crusading tradition. And, explorers combined religious interests with their material interests. Or they combined spreading Christianity along with their economic interests. And imperialism made the globalization of Christianity possible. Settlers and traders brought their religion with them. Missionaries, specifically Catholic, actively spread Christianity. And missionaries were most successful in Spanish America and the Philippines, two regions that are still heavily Catholic today. And so it wasn't just in search of spices, it was also in search of Christians. And this phrase was Vasco da Gama's response to, Hindu South Asian merchants and princes who asked why the Portuguese had sailed to India, right, in search of Christians and spices. And the phrase indicates a close connection between the Iberians, right, the Spanish and the Portuguese, and their imperial expansion, which really was a combination of feudal, crusading, and merchant activity, as well as the spread of Christianity. And in the 16th century, Catholicism became literally a world religion, but it was also an imperial religion. And it spread throughout the world via colonization, but the specific individuals who spread the faith were missionaries and religious dissenters seeking to build their own communities. And while Catholic missionaries dominated the missionaries, and found success in the New World and the Philippines, the Protestant pilgrims that fled to North America and established settler colonies in New England could also be viewed as religious dissenters. And here's a great map showing you the areas of Christianity in 1500, right? All here in green. Remember we talked about the communities in Egypt and Ethiopia. And we see a new Christian presence here in orange, which is significantly different than what it was before the Europeans began to expand. All right, conversion and adaptation in Spanish America. And the process of population collapse, conquest, and resettlement made Native Americans receptive to the conquering exclusive religions. The spectacular collapse of the Aztec and Inca empires led many Spanish and indigenous people to believe that the God of the Christians must be stronger than the traditional gods of the Americas. So millions converted and they were baptized throughout the New World. And while this was nothing new, as conquest in the Americas had long been associated with the right to impose the conqueror's pantheon of gods, the intolerance of the monotheistic Iberians, that's definitely seen in their refusal to recognize the existence of pagan deities or the local rituals. That was a break with precedent. And so the Europeans claimed exclusive religious truth, and they really tried to destroy those traditional religions as opposed to accommodating them. And there were even occasional campaigns of destruction against the old religions and some overt resistance movements. But what was more common was the blending of two religious traditions. The local gods remained influential, for sure. And the immigrant Christianity took on patterns of pre-Christian life, and the Christian saints even took on functions of pre-colonial gods. And the leaders of the church staff was a prestigious native who carried out the role of the earlier religious specialists. And many rituals survived, often some with a Christian influence. And so, in response to foreign conquest, these resistors often used the revival of pre-Hispanic religious tradition as a method of mobilization. For example, in Peru in the 1560s, there was a Taquiancoy movement that included traveling teachers and performers who promised that the Andean gods would inflict illnesses upon the Spanish and restore old order. Now, let's talk about an Asian comparison. China and the Jesuits. Christianity reached China in the powerful and prosperous Ming and Qing dynasties, and it called for a different missionary strategy. They needed government permission to operate their missionaries in China. And the Jesuits especially targeted the official Chinese elite. Now, there was no mass conversion in China. Some scholars and officials converted. And the Jesuits were appreciated by the Chinese for their mathematical, astronomical, technological, and cartographical skills. There we go. And their missionary efforts gained about 200,000, 300,000 conversions in about 250 years. Now, unlike the Americas, the powerful states of the Ming and the Qing, they didn't collapse with the arrival of Europeans. So they had to take on that different missionary strategy. China had two strong and wealthy dynasties. The nation was never in danger of being taken over by the West before 1800. And so China had this political resilience that was unparalleled in its cultural strength to the Americas when the Europeans arrived, and including the socio-political philosophy of Confucianism, which arguably achieved a spiritual significance for some, others found their spiritual needs satisfied by the centuries-old Buddhist and Taoist traditions and practices. And so they didn't gain nearly as many conversions. And aside from, a few 100,000 converts in a population of, hundreds of millions, Christianity did not necessarily find a, strong foothold in China. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that the missionaries didn't offer much that the Chinese really needed. Christianity was unappealing as an all-or-nothing type of religion that would call for rejection of a lot of old traditional Chinese culture. And in the early 18th century, the papacy and other missionary orders opposed the Jesuit accommodation policy because Matteo Ricci and some others targeted, the elites of the Chinese court, and in order to convert the Chinese, they studied Chinese culture, literature, traditions, and they had to make accommodations. So Christianity was more palatable, right? And that was unthinkable in the Americas. The Chinese court found the technical skills like astronomy and map making of the Jesuits interesting and useful, and that's why they were able to convert some. But eventually the Pope said, nope, we can't go with that accommodation policy. And so we have Kangxi versus the Pope, the Emperor of China, Kangxi. In the early 1700s, this is the Qing dynasty, into the Ming, beginning of the Qing dynasty, the Pope sought to really get rid of or eliminate the Jesuit concessions to those Chinese traditions like ancestor veneration. I called it idolatry. And this attack on a central figure or feature of the Chinese socio-political order really upset Emperor Kangxi. And he put an end to the tolerance of Christian missionaries and the privileges that the Jesuits received. And I'll see you for section 2, persistence and change in Afro-Asian cultural traditions as Christianity spread to African and other Asian cultures.